picture a traditional bodybuilder. The exact type. Hands covered in chalk dust, gripping a heavily loaded barbell.
Veins popping, lifting in some gritty, incredibly loud gym.
Right, exactly. Deadlifting massive weights. Now hold that image in your head, and right next to it, I want you to picture a genius scientist.
Someone standing in front of a sprawling whiteboard, right?
Completely immersed in solving complex, multi-layered equations. I mean, two totally different worlds, two completely different biological states.
Hmm.
Or, well, so we thought.
It is the ultimate brain versus bronze stereotype. I mean, we've been conditioned for generations to view intellectual capacity and, physical brute force as opposite ends of the human spectrum.
But here is the hook. According to a massive stack of breakthrough data from 2026, if you were to look strictly at the biological activity happening inside both of those individuals in those exact moments, they are shockingly similar.
Right, because at a microscopic molecular level, the physiological cascade happening inside that heavy lifter is actively driving profound cognitive adaptations. The gym isn't just a place to build biceps anymore.
It is a brain lab. Welcome to this deep dive into the muscle-brain axis. Our mission today is to pull apart a really exciting, highly technical stack of recent research. We're looking at major reviews and groundbreaking randomized controlled trials published between 2023 and 2026.
And the ultimate goal here is to figure out exactly how the physical act of flexing a muscle chemically alters the biological architecture of your brain.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to get there, we really have to transition away from the traditional mainstream view of exercise. For so long, the messaging has just been about thermodynamics.
Yeah, calories in, calories out.
Exactly. You burn calories, you lose weight, you look better in a t-shirt.
Yeah.
But the gritty intellectual reality of how our muscles actually talk to our neurons is, it's infinitely more complex than just burning off a donut.
It really requires a radical shift in how we understand human physiology. For decades, the medical community viewed the brain and the muscular system in complete isolation.
Like they didn't even communicate.
Right. But that paradigm shift actually started gaining momentum in the early 2000s, largely thanks to researchers who started questioning the basic function of skeletal muscle. Before that, muscle was viewed entirely as mechanical tissue.
Just a dumb arrangement of cables and pulleys, right? Designed to move your skeleton from point A to point B.
Exactly. But the breakthrough realization was that skeletal muscle is actually an endocrine organ. In fact, it's the largest endocrine organ in the human body.
Wait, okay, when you say endocrine organ, most people, they think of the thyroid or the pancreas.
Sure.
Organs that secrete hormones into the bloodstream to regulate the body. Are you saying muscle does that?
That is exactly what muscle does. When muscles contract under tension, they don't just burn energy. They manufacture and release bioactive molecules called cytokines, which have profound endocrine functions. And in the context of muscle tissue, we call these specific molecules myokines.
Myokines. It sounds like a fairly dry chemical term, but looking through this research, these molecules are doing some heavy lifting.
They really are. Some researchers in the field have actually started referring to the key myokines, specifically irisin, interleukin-6, and BDNF, as hope molecules.
I'm not going to lie, hope molecules sounds a little bit like a marketing gimmick, like a supplement you'd buy at a health food store.
Oh, it definitely sounds a bit poetic, maybe a little dramatic. But the biochemical reality behind that name is incredibly rigorous. They call them that because these molecules are manufactured on demand during muscular contraction.
And then they get pushed directly into the bloodstream.
Right, they get pushed into your bloodstream and they physically travel to the brain where they act as the chemical antidote to depressive symptoms and cognitive decay.
I actually love the mechanics of this. Think of it like the body's internal Wi-Fi. Your muscle is essentially acting as the router.
Right, like that.
You lift a heavy weight, the muscle contracts, and that mechanical stress signals the router to transmit a biochemical signal. And your brain, sitting all the way up in your skull, acts as the receiving device, picking up that signal and downloading a software upgrade.
That analogy actually holds up perfectly under a microscope. Let's trace the physical path of one of those signals, the myokine called irisin. When your muscle is at rest, it contains a precursor protein called FNDC5.
Okay, so just hanging out in the muscle fiber.
Right. But when you exercise intensely, the mechanical friction and tension inside the muscle fiber physically shear that protein. That cleavage releases irisin directly into your capillaries.
So the irisin gets pumped through the heart, up the carotid artery, and makes its way to the brain. But the brain has a strict security system, right? The blood-brain barrier. How does it get inside?
Well, irisin actually has the unique ability to physically cross the blood-brain barrier.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Once it is inside the brain tissue, it seeks out a specific docking station. Think of it as a biological keyhole on the surface of your brain cells. When irisin docks into that receptor, it flips a genetic switch that massively upregulates the expression of BDNF.
Which stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor. I've heard that acronym thrown around constantly in longevity circles. What is BDNF actually doing once that switch is flipped?
But DNF is essentially fertilizer for your neurons. It drives neurogenesis, which is the literal birth of new brain cells.
Wow, new brain cells.
Yeah, and it promotes synaptic plasticity, which is the brain's ability to rewire itself and form new connections. Without BDNF, your brain just stagnates.
Okay, so that covers the irisin pathway. But to fully map out this internal Wi-Fi, we have to talk about another myokine you mentioned, interleukin-6,
That
or IL-6. Because looking at the data, this one presents a massive paradox.
it really does.
If you go to a standard doctor's appointment tomorrow and your blood work shows chronically elevated IL-6, the doctor is going to sit you down for a serious conversation.
Because in a sedentary person, high IL-6 is a giant red flag. It's a primary marker of systemic inflammation, often driven by obesity, poor diet, or chronic disease.
So IL-6 is usually the villain in the medical narrative.
It is. But this is where the mechanism gets fascinating. When IL-6 is secreted by fat tissue, it's a chronic, slow drip. It's always there, constantly confusing the immune system, keeping it on a low-level high alert.
And that slow drip causes systemic damage over time.
Exactly. But when IL-6 is secreted by contracting muscles during a tough workout, the body reads it completely differently.
Wait, why does the body interpret it differently just because it came from a muscle?
Because of the delivery method. Muscle tissue doesn't do a slow drip. When you lift weights, the muscle dumps a massive, acute pulse of IL-6 into the blood.
Ugh.
We are talking up to 100-fold increase in minutes.
100-fold? That's insane.
Yeah, it's massive. And the body reads that acute spike not as a chronic disease state, but as a temporary metabolic emergency. To protect the surrounding tissue from the stress of the workout, that muscle-derived IL-6 actually exerts a powerful anti-inflammatory effect.
So it flips from pro-inflammatory to anti-inflammatory.
Yes, it actively suppresses pro-inflammatory markers.
You're talking about markers like TNF-alpha.
Exactly. Think of TNF-alpha as the body's systemic fire alarm. It drives inflammation. The massive pulse of IL-6 from the muscle acts like a fire extinguisher, shutting down that TNF-alpha alarm and improving insulin sensitivity across the whole body.
So it's the difference between, say, a leaky pipe slowly rotting the wood in your house over 10 years versus a fire hose being turned on for 5 minutes to put out a fire. Context is everything.
The source of the signal completely changes the biological meaning of the message.
Okay, I need to hit pause for a second and play the skeptic, because if you're listening to this, you might have a massive red flag going up in your head right now.
Let's hear it.
I have been told my entire life that if I want to clear my head, I should go for a run. We constantly hear about the runner's high and how aerobic cardio is the gold standard for getting blood flow to the brain.
Yeah.
Are you saying we should just abandon the treadmill and only lift weights?
No, definitely not abandon cardio. Aerobic exercise is fantastic for vascular health, heart health, and generating raw blood flow. But that is where recent systematic reviews provide a critical distinction. Brain health, especially protecting the brain as we age, isn't just about piping more blood up to the skull.
What else is it about?
It's also about intense neuromuscular demand.
Neuromuscular demand, meaning how the brain communicates with the muscle, rather than just how the heart pumps blood to it.
Think about the mechanics of going for a jog. Running is a highly repetitive, linear movement. Once you get going, your brain largely puts the movement on autopilot.
Yeah, you just sort of zone out.
Exactly. It's handled by the spinal cord and lower brain centers. You can listen to a podcast, daydream, but when you attempt to squat a heavy barbell or perform a complex dumbbell movement, you absolutely cannot zone out.
Right. I mean, if you zone out with a heavy barbell on your back, you're going to the hospital.
You are forcing your central nervous system to rapidly synchronize thousands of motor units. Your prefrontal cortex has to map the spatial trajectory of the weight, balance your center of gravity, and recruit maximum physical force simultaneously.
That sounds like a lot of processing power.
It is. It engages high-level executive control in the brain. It is a massive cognitive challenge that steady-state cardio simply does not replicate.
Which brings us to the actual clinical data on intensity. There is a wild finding from a 2023 trial that perfectly illustrates this. Researchers took 14 trained men and put them through a standard strength training protocol, Bench presses, leg presses, lat pull-downs.
Standard gym stuff.
Yeah. But they split them based on intensity. One group lifted a moderate weight at 60% of their 1-rep max. The other group went heavy, lifting at 80% of their 1-rep max.
And the physiological responses between those two groups were starkly different.
And what's crazy is that both groups were working hard. We know this because the researchers measured their blood lactate levels. Both groups saw their lactate spike to about 14 to 16 millimoles per liter.
Which is incredibly high.
Just for context for the listener, a normal resting lactate level is usually around 1 or 2 millimoles. So hitting 16 means these guys were absolutely swimming in lactic acid.
Right, they were feeling that deep, intense muscular burn regardless of which group they were in.
Exactly. But the group lifting the lighter weight at 60%,
Mm-hmm.
their BDNF levels, that cognitive fertilizer we just talked about, did not change at all. Zero spike.
But the group lifting at 80% of their maximum capacity experienced an absolute explosion of BDNF. The data shows their levels went from a baseline of 461 picograms per milliliter, skyrocketing all the way up to 1730. That's almost a quadruple increase.
Yeah, and that peak happened a full hour after the workout was already over.
That is the detail that completely reframes how you should look at your workout. You can be sweating, you can be feeling the burn, your muscles can be full of lactic acid, but if the mechanical load isn't heavy enough, the router does not send the Wi-Fi signal to the brain.
BDNF release is highly load dependent. You
Yeah.
literally have to struggle. Light weights just won't cut it.
You have to signal to your nervous system that the environment demands a high-level biological adaptation.
Exactly. The mechanical tension must breach a very specific threshold to trigger that chemical cascade.
So if we know we get these massive acute spikes of BDNF from lifting heavy, what happens if you do that consistently for months or years? Let's look at the long-term structural changes, because this is where the anti-aging claims get literal.
We are moving past temporary chemical spikes and talking about the physical remodeling of the brain. A phenomenal 2026 trial examined older adults who committed to regular, moderate to heavy resistance training. And the researchers didn't just, give them a memory test on a piece of paper.
No, they put them into functional MRI machines to assess their biological brain age based on cortical thickness and neural density.
And the scans showed that the participants who lifted heavy weights possessed brains that looked 1.4 to 2.3 years younger than the control group. Just let that sink in.
It's incredible.
By picking up heavy pieces of iron, you are physically reversing the biological clock of your brain by up to 2 years.
And the imaging revealed that the rejuvenation wasn't just a localized effect. It improved connectivity across multiple distributed neural networks. Most notably, they saw massive improvements in the frontoparietal networks.
And what is the frontoparietal network responsible for in our day-to-day lives?
It is the command center for executive function. It handles complex problem-solving, sustained focus, planning your day, and quick decision-making.
Things like navigating a complicated intersection while driving or managing your finances.
Right. These are the exact cognitive skills that tend to degrade first as we age.
Which are perfectly demonstrated by a recent Brazilian study. They took 44 older adults who were already diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, or MCI.
MCI is a very critical clinical window. It is considered a high-risk transitional state. Not everyone who has mild cognitive impairment will go on to develop Alzheimer's disease, but it's the primary precursor state.
Your brain is basically standing on the edge of the cliff.
Precisely.
So the researchers put half of these adults on a twice-a-week weight training program for 6 months. Basic, heavy movements. Leg presses, chest flies, lat pull-downs, pushing up to that 80% maximum capacity we talked about.
And the other half acted as the control group and did not exercise.
The structural outcomes are undeniable.
Mm-hmm.
In the control group, the non-exercisers, the MRIs, showed the typical expected brain atrophy over those 6 months.
The actual physical tissue of their brains was slowly wasting away.
Right. But the weightlifting group was physically protected from that atrophy. The tissue loss was halted, specifically in the hippocampus and the precuneus.
Most people know the hippocampus is the brain's memory inbox. It's where we form new memories.
But the precuneus is less commonly talked about. What actually happens there?
The precuneus is essentially your brain's internal GPS and mental time travel center. It is crucial for visuospatial processing, knowing where your body is in a room, and episodic memory, which is your ability to vividly recall specific events from your past.
And both the hippocampus and the precuneus are the prime early targets of Alzheimer's pathology, right?
Exactly. So the lifting preserved the gray matter in those critical zones. But the study also noted it protected their white matter integrity.
Gray matter is where the processing happens, but white matter is the brain's superhighway.
Yes, it is made up of axons coated in myelin, which acts like rubber insulation on an electrical wire. That insulation allows different regions of the brain to communicate at lightning speed.
And when white matter degrades,
The signals leak, and you experience severe cognitive slowing and brain fog.
so resistance training is literally reinforcing the insulation on the wires inside your head.
Mm.
And this wasn't just happening on a computer screen, it translated to the real world.
Absolutely. The weightlifting group scored significantly higher on visual episodic memory tests.
They were objectively better at recalling when and where specific events happened in their past compared to the control group.
It proves that resistance training is not merely symptom management. It is a disease-modifying intervention. It actively alters the physical pathology of cognitive decline.
Okay, this is all incredibly compelling science, but we have to make this practical. Let's be real for a second.
Sure.
If I am listening to this, and I am not a gym rat, hearing that I need to lift 80% of my 1-rep max sounds incredibly intimidating. It sounds like a recipe for a herniated disc if you don't know what you're doing. How do we translate this into a concrete, safe action plan for tomorrow?
We can draw a very clear minimum effective dose blueprint directly from how these clinical trials were designed. You do not need to be a powerlifter to harness the muscle-brain axis.
Okay, so where do we start?
First, let's look at frequency. Twice a week. You do not need to live in the gym. 2 dedicated days is the scientifically validated threshold to get these cognitive benefits.
Twice a week is entirely manageable for almost anyone's schedule. What about the actual volume of the workout?
3 sets of 10 repetitions, targeting the major muscle groups. You want to focus on multi-joint compound movements, leg presses, seated rows, chest presses, hamstring curls.
Why those specifically?
The goal is to engage as much total muscle mass as possible, because the more tissue you recruit, the more of those hope molecules you push into the bloodstream.
But the intensity is the catch. How does a beginner safely hit that 80% threshold without maxing out on a dangerous barbell squat?
That is a very common misconception. Hitting 80% intensity does not mean you have to put a bending barbell on your back. It simply means relative failure.
Relative failure. Okay,
Yeah.
explain that.
If you are doing a set of 10 repetitions on a very safe padded leg press machine, the first 6 or 7 reps should feel completely manageable. But by the time you hit that 8th, 9th, and 10th rep, your muscles should be physically failing.
So your nervous system should be straining to push the sled.
Exactly. That intense mechanical struggle, where the movement slows down and you have to grit your teeth, is the exact trigger the brain needs to remodel itself.
We have to give the brain a biological reason to adapt. It won't upgrade the hardware if the software isn't being challenged. And there is a brilliant nuance in the research that I want to inject here. They call it the dual task hack.
The dual task data is fascinating because it layers cognitive load right on top of physical load.
Exactly. The researchers found that if you combine a heavy physical effort with a simultaneous cognitive challenge, you get even higher neural gains. In the lab, they used a specialized piece of equipment called the Huber device.
Right, where you basically stand on an oscillating, unstable platform, pushing and pulling heavy handles.
All while tracking a complex visual target on a screen in front of you.
You are forcing the prefrontal cortex to process real-time error correction, maintain spatial awareness, and exert maximum physical force all at the exact same time.
The brain absolutely loves to be challenged to think and push simultaneously. So if you don't have a high-tech Huber device, you can recreate this. Doing a complex movement like a heavy dynamic lunge or a kettlebell flow where you have to balance track your body in 3-dimensional space and generate force, you're basically doing a dual task protocol.
You are giving your brain the ultimate workout. And, if we step back and look at this from an evolutionary standpoint, the entire muscle-brain axis makes perfect logical sense.
How so?
Think about the environment our ancestors evolved in. They didn't have the luxury of a sedentary life where physical exertion was an optional hobby you did at 6 a.m.
No, they had to perform heavy, complex, and highly dangerous physical tasks just to survive. Tracking prey, carrying heavy animal carcasses across uneven terrain.
Building shelters, fighting off predators. Their daily movement wasn't isolated on a comfortable, perfectly balanced machine. It was chaotic, heavy, and cognitively demanding.
And evolution is relentlessly efficient. The human brain evolved to directly reward that intense physical struggle.
Precisely. When you engage in high-intensity, complex movement, The brain rewards you with neurogenesis, improved memory, and cognitive sharpness, because those are the exact mental traits you needed to survive the harsh environment that forced you to move in the first place.
Physical robustness and cognitive sharpness had to rise and fall together.
Exactly.
That completely changes the motivation to go to the gym. By lifting heavy weights, you aren't just trying to look good. You are biologically tricking your brain into a state of survival and adaptation. You are reclaiming your evolutionary intelligence.
You're plugging back into an ancient biological circuitry that the modern world has largely engineered out of our daily lives.
You are going to the brain lab. We've covered a lot of ground today. We traced the myokines, mapped the internal Wi-Fi, established the 80% intensity threshold, and looked at the actual reversal of brain aging.
It's a lot to process.
It is. But I want to leave you with a gritty, lingering question to think about the next time you are sitting at your desk feeling sluggish, unfocused, and dealing with brain fog.
What's the question?
Could the modern epidemic of cognitive decline and brain fog simply be a symptom of profound muscular underuse? What if the cure for our aging minds has been sitting quietly on the dumbbell rack this whole time, just waiting to be picked up? Think about it.